Hello and welcome to the Business of Story. I'm your host, Park Howell, and today we have a guest who wrote the book on how to put your best self front and center when hosting a virtual sales or marketing meeting. Showing up as your most engaging and persuasive self is one thing, but how do you structure your most persuasive virtual communications? Well, that's a whole other story. That's why I've made it easier than ever to find and use my ABTs of Better Business Communication quick online courses. They're really more tutorials that arm you with the ABTs of selling and the ABTs of branding to help you craft and tell way more compelling stories that sell, especially in the virtual world. Just go to businessofstory.com/ABT. And let's face it, we're all in sales. Even if you're not pitching a product or service, but trying to get your people, your prospects, your vendors, your investors to buy into your vision or mission, your way of thinking or doing, well, you're in sales. So visit businessofstory.com/ABT and take one or both of the ABTs of selling and or the ABTs of branding quick courses. You'll not only be more engaging with your virtual audiences, but you will, sell more. That's businessofstory.com/ABT. Now, once you're leveraging your Business of Story frameworks, practice and rehearse how you are showing up on your virtual meetings. I, for one, bring a lot of enthusiasm to my presentations, which I learn may not always translate on the other end of a computer screen. I learned a ton from today's guest, Julie Hansen, who helps professionals communicate with greater confidence, credibility, and influence in a virtual and hybrid world.
A lot of times I hear people give really bad advice, which is don't gesture on video, don't use your hands. Well, for a lot of people, that helps them with their energy and it helps them think. And that's not great advice because then we have these really wooden performances because people are so busy trying not to use their hands. And so, they're just all, nailed down. But what we want to do is we want to try to use those a little more purposefully and also make sure they're visible in frame, which means you have to develop sort of this muscle memory about where your frame is and try to keep those movements in frame because a lot of movements are just below the surface. Like I'll see some fingers pop up because we can't see, unlike in person, your hand slowly raise up and suddenly in film, it just pops up like a surprise. So slow and purposeful.
Julie is the author of 3 sales books, including the top sales book of 2021, Look Me in the Eye, using video to build relationships with customers, partners, and teams. She is also the creator of the Selling on Video Masterclass. In addition to an award-winning sales career, Julie worked as a professional actor, performing in over 75 plays, commercials, movies, and television shows. In fact, you may have even seen her in an episode of HBO's Sex and the City. Now, envision a virtual meeting that feels as if you are sitting across from someone having a cup of coffee. Impossible? Well, not anymore. Look Me in the Eye reveals how actors, television reporters, and digital influencers build personal relationships through the screen, and how you can apply these same skills to your virtual meetings, video calls, even your video recordings. Now, many relationships never progress past that quote-unquote, you're on mute. Why? Essential qualities you may easily convey in person, like trust and empathy and authenticity, they get lost on video. Today, you will learn how to establish a personal connection with one person or 1,000 on video, when you absolutely positively must look into the camera, and when it's okay to sneak a peek. You'll learn how to avoid resting business face, I love that term, and other self-sabotaging virtual behaviors that you don't even realize you're doing. A simple acting technique for connecting with those not on video, and how to read body language, present content, and manage tools while staying engaged with your audience. I know, that's a ton. Like I said, I learned it from Julie. Today, on the Business of Story. Julie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Park. I'm so delighted to be here with you.
And who do we have to thank for making this happen?
Alice Hyman.
Our mutual great friend, Alice Hyman. She has spoken so fondly of you and your amazing work. And then you came out with your new book about, 6 months ago, maybe?
Yeah, that's 8 months, I think. Getting closer to that.
8 months?
Yeah. Hard to believe.
And I kept saying to myself, I got to get Julie on the show, And so finally, I found the time to reach out, and thank you for being here. It's just awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you are going to help us today understand how we can own that virtual stage, because heaven knows we've all been relegated to these video, team virtual sessions. And it is so hard to find ways to connect, through the interwebs. And then number two, when you're presenting on this, I call it live amateur TV, because we're all learning how to do this as we go. So you are going to bring a wealth of information today, correct?
Learning on the job, learning on your audience, which is not the best way to learn, right? Learning on your customers' time.
You come from the film and TV world as a professional actress.
Yes.
And so that has to play into a lot of what you know about really owning this virtual world.
Well, absolutely. And that was the motivation for the book and for my Selling on Video Masterclass, because what happened, Park, was it brought me back to when I first started acting on film and television and video. Because like most actors, I started out on stage, and that's really where you learn your chops, right? And being on stage, being in live theater is much like, I was a salesperson too at the time, was much like, face-to-face sales or speaking to an audience in person. You have that energy from the audience you're feeding off of. You can see when things land and when they don't. It gives you more energy and passion. And so I did that for a couple of years, and then I had an opportunity. I'd moved to New York, and I had an opportunity to audition for a little show called Law and Order. And, I thought, well, I'm an actor. I know what I'm doing. And I went into that audition. I didn't plan to do anything differently. And I got in front of that camera. They said, scene, and started to record. And I'm supposed to be talking to the camera, which is supposed to be another person, but that other person isn't there. And I'm supposed to be having this conversation. And I don't know if I'm supposed to just keep looking at the camera or it's okay to look away. I didn't know what to do with my hands. I just didn't know if I should just stand there or move. So awkward. I know I was terrible, because after about 30 seconds, the casting director was, okay, thank you. We'll be in touch. Spoiler alert.
And you never heard another thing from them?
No. And so I have my claim to fame is I'm one of the few actors in New York that never got a role on Law and Order, because there are literally thousands of episodes of Law and Order, right?
And they'll take anybody, right? Except you were this mannequin.
Anyway, so, but what I learned was, I was talking to an actor friend about it, and she was like, well, you have to take on-camera classes. Like, nobody knows how to talk to a camera. Well, just because you're an actor, you don't know how to talk to a camera, right? There's nothing natural about it. And it's a new medium, and a new medium requires new skills. And so I did. I took these on-camera classes. I practiced, all the different techniques, learned a series of techniques that really helped. And pretty soon I started booking parts. And so that was great. And I continued to, hone those skills. So when the pandemic hit and I saw every business person, in the world suddenly having to turn their camera on and struggling with the same things I struggled with as an actor, with no real guidance except, hey, get a camera, you got to get on Zoom, you got to have, lights. It's like, yeah, there's a lot of technical stuff to it, but that's not the only issue, right? That if you don't understand how to communicate in this new environment, it doesn't matter how great your equipment is. We've all seen crappy movies where they've got good lighting, they've got a good camera, right? That does not make a good movie. So that's when I started putting together, these techniques for business people, how to communicate on camera, how to connect with people. And that's really where my work has taken me.
Going back to that very first class that you took after coming off the stage and going, wow, that didn't go well. Do you remember, like, what was the one aha moment or the one thing you took away that just like completely changed your world when looking into a camera?
A number of things. It was very eye-opening, but probably the major shift is understanding that the camera is the eyes of your audience. The camera only sees what it sees. A lot of people say, "Oh, the camera really loves him," or "The camera loves her," and that's not true. The camera is objective. The truth is that the person that is great on camera probably loves the camera. They love having that conversation. They see someone in the camera. They're not just talking to a black or green dot, right? They're actually connecting, because as people, we can tell when someone is just sort of talking blankly to anyone who will listen. Nobody's out there and I'm just talking, or, I'm really talking to you, Park, and we're really, I see you, I hear you, even though I can't physically perhaps see you. And that is, it's as close to acting as most people are ever going to get, right? Is looking at camera, being able to understand that the person is there. You can't see them necessarily, or you can't, if they're on your screen, you can't see them fully, and the camera isn't always lined up with their eyes. And so there's all these techniques around it, but they're still there and you're still talking to them and you're talking to one person.
Is it doubly difficult on Zoom or any sort of virtual session, even like we're doing it right now? I get to see you, but our audience doesn't, because this is just a podcast. We are on Squadcast, and I know that now I'm looking into the camera, so I'm presumably looking right at you, right? And then when you start talking, my eyes dart down to you off of the camera. I notice that you are looking into the camera because you're looking right at me, but I want to be reading your facial expressions to see how things are landing with you. And then when it's my turn to talk, I got to zip back up to the camera, remember to zip back up to the camera.
Right.
And so now you've got this really double whammy, jumping between the camera and the person talking to you on the other end of that screen.
And the problem with that is that we associate that sort of shifty-eyed, especially if you're back and forth a lot, we associate that with, a guilty conscience or not telling the truth. So you don't want to be too shifty. There's a whole art of reading body language when you're looking at the camera. So first of all, we have to understand that oftentimes what we're looking for on the screen in people's body language is different. Our body language is different when we're sitting in front of a screen. So if you are looking for those cues from your audience, you're going to be very disappointed, because you're going to see a lot of these blank faces out there, right? And I call this resting business face. And it's just this blank video face. And it is how we have been trained by media to sit in front of a screen, right? So your audience doesn't have great, on-camera skills necessarily. Most people don't. And so they're doing what they do. They're in their comfy chair at home. They're sitting in front of a screen. They're seated. Their energy's low. And their face is not necessarily very expressive. So whatever you're looking for, oftentimes you're not going to get it, right? And I don't know about you, but if when you talk to groups and you have, that menagerie of faces on your screen, if you look around, you don't see people mostly going, even if it's good and engaging, and you get emails probably afterwards going, "That was great." And you think, that person didn't even look like they were interested. That happens to me all the time. And because you can't assign in-person meaning to on-screen behavior. So the first thing is, what are you looking for exactly from your audience? Are you really getting the truth? And is your time better spent like connecting with them through the camera? Because if we were sitting across from each other, Park, and I was talking and I was sharing something with you, and you were staring at your phone or the table or your shoes, I would really not feel like you were paying attention. And that is the same, that's how we're wired. If someone is looking at me, they're paying attention. If someone isn't, they're not. I don't care that you're on camera. I don't care that it's hard for you to see me. That's how people feel. And that's the reality of the situation. So there's times where you really need to be looking at the camera. Certainly we need to do check-ins on that body language every once in a while, but there's times to check in where it's not so distracting, right? as opposed to when someone is sharing something with you. You can get very good at reading that language with your peripheral vision. We have much stronger peripheral vision than we realize, most people. And we just don't use it consciously. We use it when like suddenly somebody comes up behind us, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you've ever played sports, you get very used to anticipating, like seeing where the other people are. So you can see major changes in expression, movement with your peripheral vision. And then if that looks like something you need to check in on, then that's the time to look.
Is there anything we can do as the presenter to pique more engagement, or do we just have this now virtual wall between us and you're like, don't sweat it, do the best you can, don't read too much in their reactions to you, and just know that your content is killer, and that's really what you're there for?
There are absolutely things we can do about to be more engaging on video. And that's much of what the book is about, because most people are not using it to its full potential, right? I believe we can create more of an in-person experience through video without going into the metaverse, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there are techniques that support that help you to do that. So let me ask you, have you ever seen a TV show where that actor suddenly talks to you through the camera, where you feel like they're talking to you?
Yeah, breaking that fourth wall or whatever they call it.
Yeah, breaking that fourth wall. Like, Ferris Bueller or...
That's a great example, actually. Yes, when they're looking right at you. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Right. They're looking at... Well, it is very compelling, isn't it?
It feels like they pull you into the story. All of a sudden, you're peeking behind the curtains and you're seeing the production going on.
Exactly. That is such a powerful skill. So we have, for people that don't know what the fourth wall is in acting, it's you have, like on a stage, you have 3 walls that are real to the side and behind you as an actor. And then that fourth wall is the audience or the camera, right? And so most of the time, actors go about just kind of doing their business. They don't pay attention to the audience or the camera. Well, when they do, it is very compelling. But they do it in a way that's compelling. And so we have that same fourth wall with our audience, and we have to find ways to break through that. And one of those ways, as you see with actors, is they look directly at the camera. And not only do they look at the camera, they look like they're talking, and it feels like they're talking to only you. Like they are Ferris Bueller was talking to millions of people. But it felt like we were having a one-on-one conversation, because that is the power of the camera. Everybody is having their own individual experience with you through your eye contact. And that's one thing we can't do on stage. You're either, you're making eye contact, you're trying to work the room, but nobody always feels like you're connecting with them. So if you know how to use that and create that connection, it can be really powerful. And that's just one of the ways to really make it feel in person.
It's like a no-brainer, look right into that camera, but that's one thing. How do you actually caress that camera with your eyes and your reactions so you feel like you're talking to a person and not just my Logitech camera right now?
Right. So, and that's a skill. You're right. That's why people take classes, because that sounds, I tell people all the time, look at the camera. You think that changes behavior? We hear that. It's not a newsflash, but it is very counterintuitive. There's nothing natural about it. It's a new behavior, just like when you learn to drive, right? You had to do all these different controls, and you had to look in the rearview mirror, and it wasn't natural, but we learned it.
So what do we do? What are some of the things to think of?
Well, it's a process. And so I go through in the book. That's why I have 2 chapters on, how do you make eye contact in the book, because it really is a process. And it's, first of all, getting comfortable in front of that camera, seeing it as not your enemy. Like it starts with how you feel about your camera. Like if you feel like, I got to be on camera and it's your enemy, that is conveyed. The camera picks up your feelings, right? So how you feel about it is going to come through. If you're uncomfortable, it's going to come through. So I would say start by making friends with your camera, right? Make it a friend. It's your ally. It's the vehicle through which you're going to connect with your audience.
Befriend your pal, that camera.
Right, your friend. And so it's like, start every day. Just have a casual conversation with your camera. Just, this is how we learn authenticity on camera too. And we have to fine tune that with behavior that actually is effective on camera, but that's where it starts. And then it's getting specific about who are you talking to? And if you've got someone on your screen, can you, quickly get them in your mind's eye and just simply put them into that camera? And you're still talking to them. They're just an inch away in your camera. And you can use, the peripheral vision to support any feedback you might be getting. Now, if you're talking to an audience that isn't there, that if you're recording something, for instance, you have to use your imagination you still have to see that person in a camera. When we don't see anyone, we've got what I call the, deer in the headlights look. It's like you see a lot of that in some of these recorded videos. Like nobody's there. I'm just talking to somebody, I hope, and it affects your energy. It affects your voice. It affects everything because you're not believing that you're talking to someone or someone is on the other side. You are talking to someone. They just aren't there at the same time you are, right? But you have to see them. And it's even as an actor, you imagine if you're doing a scene, say a dialogue scene, and oftentimes I'd be shooting my lines on a day that other actor isn't there. And so it's more of a dialogue. Well, I have to imagine them saying their lines and respond with the right energy, right? So I have to not just see them, but I have to hear them. And that's the same thing with recording videos for business. It's like your audience is never just sitting there not having a thought, right? Even if it's like even a monologue, the other person, it's not really a one-sided conversation. The other person's part is just silent. They are having mental thoughts like, or they might nod. And I have to inject those. I have to imagine those because that gives me the energy, the right energy and cadence for an actual conversation. So it is part technique, it is part art, but it is absolutely possible because you see, thousands of people do it on TV and film. So we have this whole wealth of knowledge that this industry has been fine-tuning for dozens and dozens of years. And I just applied that to business. And it's just interesting to me how many business people are like, oh, I'll just, like you said, I'll figure it out.
I do a lot of training, as a lot of folks do virtually, and I may have a room anywhere from 12 people to 125 people in a Zoom session. And so I'm just seeing this malaise of faces out there.
How are you going to read that? What conclusions are you going to take?
I suppose what I do is kind of, I guess what you were talking about there is I try to picture them as like, who is my core audience here and how can I create a persona in my head and speak to that individual? And my hope is I get it right and then it connects with all the individuals out there.
Yes. Yeah. Here's the secret to really connecting with someone on video, or one of the secrets is you can only talk to one person at a time. Right. This is really true in person as well, but it's not as critical as when you're on camera. It's like you're never talking to 50 people because, again, people are having their individual experience with you. So if you pick just one person to talk to, everybody, like you said, will feel like you're talking to them. So that's the beauty of talking to the camera, and it's a really powerful skill if you can use that. And to your point of seeing all those people out there, if you've got a big room, I always say, because most of us, even if we can't see our audience or there's just so many of them, they look bored. I always say, imagine somebody having the best possible reaction, right? Because that brings out the best in you. And that can turn around people that maybe weren't so hot on you in the beginning, right? But it does not serve you to go, oh, that person looks bored. Oh my gosh. Because then what happens? We start racing. We question ourselves. We get nervous. It does not serve you as the presenter or the speaker.
How about your hand gestures, eye movement, eye gestures? How can you really, caress the camera that way without overdoing it?
Well, first of all, eye contact, there's no overdoing on eye contact because you want to be available and looking at the camera as much as possible. They say relationship experts say that we need to aim for making eye contact about 2/3 of the time when we're in person to build a relationship. Well, I believe that's more on video because if you aren't looking at the camera, if you aren't looking at me, I don't know what you're looking at, right? We are suddenly disconnected because you could be looking at your phone. You could be, maybe you are looking at your notes. You want to ask me a question, but I don't know. So again, if the camera doesn't see it, it didn't happen. And everybody in the audience, everybody on their, on their end, on their screen, they get to decide how much to look at you. People are like, isn't that a lot of eye contact? It's like, well, nobody is going to stare at you on your screen, at your eyes 100% of the time, but you want to be there when they do, right? You want to make that connection as much as possible. But in terms of other body language, the rule is really less is more. So Sir Michael Caine, who has a great book on acting on film, and he said, acting on stage is like acting with a pointer, but acting on film is like acting with a laser. You have to be much more precise, you have to be much more specific, and you have to be slower. And what a lot of people I see doing are taking, this in-person body language that we use, and they're trying to use it in this small space, and it's too fast, it's very vague, it's loose, and it's very distracting because you've got this small space that you're in front of somebody with, and so any movement is we're going to be drawn to it. That's just a human condition, like we're drawn to movement. So you've got these fast movements and people are, trying to follow them, and they're gone as soon as they're there. And we don't know what it meant. Did it support what you're saying? Was I supposed to get something from that? Are you nervous? Are you swatting a fly? What's going on? So that's, we have to be aware of that.
So the idea is to slow down then and I have a tendency of probably speeding up when I'm presenting. I'm very passionate about my work and I'm like, hey, guess that needed. But the idea is I should probably, step on my foot to remind myself, slow down, Park. Don't get those hands flailing around and
we're
just
talk
take
about
it
you.
Oh, I guess that's right. You were kind enough. I produced a video yesterday, folks. It's just 4 minutes long, and it's about my ABTs of selling courses. And so I thought, what the hell? Let's go out on a limb. And I sent it to Julie just before we got on here. I said, would you mind watching this and now critique it for me? So, all right. So let's dive in. Have at it.
Are you
Pull
ready?
no
Okay.
punches.
All
I
right.
can take it. I am so ready.
First of all, it's good, Park. You are good. Yeah, and your passion and your energy really comes through. And what's interesting is we have to bring more energy to video and to virtual calls than in person because the camera takes away a bunch of our energy, right? And because it flattens you, it's two-dimensional, all this kind of stuff. We don't have that whatever in-person energy we're able to give off is not there. So great energy, great passion, good eye contact. So it was natural. There were times where you looked away to sort of gather your thoughts, but you brought it back to the camera. The only thing I would say about that eye contact, what's very powerful is when you complete a thought, when you complete a sentence, especially if it's like you've just talked about, a major value point or something, is to hold that last beat is what they call it on film. Like hold the last beat. Just hold eye contact, pause, very powerful. In terms of framing, there's a couple of types of shots in film and video. There's what's called a medium close-up and an extreme close-up. And you were a little towards the extreme close-up. And I'll tell you why, because a medium close-up is typically, you've got about a fistful of space between you and the top of the screen. And then that should allow, you to use some body language and some arms, hands in the shot. But what happens is, if you think about it, we're trying to recreate this in-person experience. And we want to take into consideration that personal distance. So we're about typically 12 to 18 inches from our camera, right? Depending on how your setup is. Our audience is probably 12 to 18 inches from their screen, maybe closer. And so that's about the right personal space. Now, if you start to get closer than that, you are suddenly sort of crossing those boundaries that are uncomfortable for some people, right?
Hmm.
Um, so we want to be wary of that, and we want to have, you know, I don't want you to be too far back and that we can't see your face and your eyes and your expression because that's why we're on camera. But we want to use that space wisely. So I would say framing, get more into a medium close up.
I agree with you there too, Julie, because when I shot it, I've got a new Sony camera, and I'm a production company of one, and talent and everything else. I got it up there.
Right.
And
Gotcha.
it took like 20 takes to get through it all. And then when I looked at it, I go, it is. I agree with you. It's probably a little bit too tight, but I ran with it for now because I just want to get something out of it. But I'm going to take your advice and shoot it again. And I really like that idea of that fist between your head and the top of the screen as just some sort of way to give you a sense of what that medium shot would work. That's a great idea.
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good reminder. The other thing was in terms of space, like, you've got this great energy, and what often people do when they have that energy and they're trying to make a point is they start moving towards the camera. And I don't want you to get rid of that energy. What we have to do is we have to channel that energy into our face, our voice, slower, purposeful movements, which is difficult because we want to move, right? We want to move towards the camera like you would if you were seated towards someone. But what happens is that looks like, that's sort of invading that personal space, and it's distracting because suddenly you're out of proportion. You got that somebody's huge, part of their face in your face. And so I teach a technique. It's called the pane of glass technique, and it's really just thinking about there's a pane of glass between you and your camera, right? So a vertical pane of glass. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to hit your head on that glass, right? And you don't want to put your hands through that glass because anything you put closer to the camera will be abnormally super big. Like, I'm holding my hands up to the camera. They look enormous, and they're actually very normal sized hands, I want to say.
Fair enough.
So that is, trying to keep from breaking that plane. Now, if you're going to break that plane, that's okay, but do it for effect. Don't do it as just a normal, conversational body language. So we want to try to keep our movements within this frame.
I love that pane of glass idea. That's really cool because you're right. If you're sitting in a conference room, you are using that three-dimensional space, and you might move in to make a point, whatever. But on camera, when you move in, all of a sudden you're like, this head's gotten big. And
it's huge. Everything is most things are magnified on camera. So that's what we have to remember. Just those little, move forward 2 inches. It's like you just leapt into someone's lap.
yeah.
So being aware of that and just the boundaries here of your frame, understanding where to gesture, like I said, we want to be slow, purposeful, specific, but we also want to try to be in frame as much as possible. Because, for instance, in your video, you're a gesturer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, which is great. Like, a lot of times I hear people give really bad advice, which is don't gesture on video, don't use your hands. It's like, well, for a lot of people that helps them with their energy and it helps them think, and that's not great advice because then we have these really wooden performances because people are so busy trying not to use their hands, and so they're just all nailed down. But what we want to do is we want to try to use those a little more purposefully and also make sure they're visible in frame, which means you have to develop sort of this muscle memory about where your frame is and try to keep those movements in frame, because a lot of movements are just below the surface. Like, I'll see some fingers pop up once, and again, movement is compelling. My eyes are drawn to it. So suddenly I'm thinking about your hands, and you may be telling a great story. Because we can't see, unlike in person, your hand slowly raise up and suddenly in film, it just pops up like a surprise, right? So slow and purposeful.
How about the pace? That's the thing that I always try to really pay attention to because I can start racing and I just like, all right, let's slow it down. But I also don't want these videos, in this case we're talking about, going on forever.
I've taught presentation skills for years and years, and I think the rule is no different on video. We don't have to be faster. We don't have to be slower, but things are more obvious, right? Those, if you are a fast talker, it's more obvious. If you are too slow, it gets very lethargic. I think the energy that goes around along with it is often the problem. But yeah, and I'm not going to take a fast talker and turn them into a slow talker, right?
You want them to be authentic, right, on how they're presenting.
Yeah, right. So what a fast talker needs to do is find places to slow down. Make sure you stop. Don't make sure you're not beyond what people can understand. You need to work on it if you need to take it down a notch. But find places to slow down and add variety, because anything that is just a repetitive pattern, people get used to, and then they start to tune it out, right? And there's enough challenges trying to keep people engaged virtually without giving them reason to do that. So if it's just an onslaught of information at this pace, then I'm going to be like, well, I lost you about 30 seconds ago and I can't bother to pick up where we're at, right? Or it's so slow, I'm going to start reading this email. So I always say one of the tools to keep people engaged virtually that we have to really use is a lot of variety. And that means not just with the content, but with our delivery, right? If we deliver everything at the same pace, if we deliver it all at the same tone, if we don't use any gestures, if we use one gesture over and over, those start to add up in people and make them want to go somewhere else.
I call that the Rachel Maddow effect. When I watch her on MSNBC, she brings so much histrionics, I think is the term I'm looking for, when she's making a point and she's rolling her eyes and she's throwing her head around and whatever. And it just gets to the point, it becomes nauseating, at least for me. I'm like, just tell me the news. I don't need all of these other emotions and reactions and hand flinging and eye rolling going on.
Well, you're probably not her ideal audience then, because I think a lot of people go there specifically for that. But you're right. I mean, she's a good example of being very expressive. And, some people like that, some people don't. But I think in business, we err on the side of not being expressive enough. And that's a problem. In terms of forging a connection with someone, it's hard to connect with someone who's just, a blank face. I had a sales manager send me a video of one of his sales reps who he said, he's doing everything right. He's saying all the right things, but he just can't get to the second call. He can't get the next meeting scheduled. And so I watched the video. It was a young guy and very articulate and knew what he was talking about. But honestly, when he said something like, we helped this client save $100,000, his face and his voice, it looked and sounded like he could have said, pass the salt, right? It was just like there was I couldn't tell from his expression, is that good news or bad news? And we really can't afford to be that bland on camera, because this is how we're connecting. And like I said, most people do get in front of a camera, get in front of a screen, and they sort of shut down expressive wise. And so we have to fight against that. And a lot of times we don't even realize it. We think, well, I thought I was pretty engaging. And I remember as an actor, I was working with this director, and we were rehearsing this scene, and I was supposed to be, madly in love with this guy who I'd probably met like the day before, but that's acting. And the director kept stopping me and he said, you don't look very happy. You don't look like you like him. And I'm like, well, I am. I feel, I feel that way. I thought he was crazy. Well, he said, come here. He was recording it. And I watched that video, and sure enough, I did not look happy. I looked kind of pissed. And, I may have felt it. I may have thought I was doing it. But it doesn't matter what you think you do, what you meant to do. It only matters what the camera sees. And so sometimes our feelings, our emotions, they get disconnected from our face, and we've been trained in business to sort of tamp things down, right? Because that's supposed to be more respectable and, buttoned up. And that just doesn't work on camera. And so you have to find those moments to be more expressive. Let us know how you feel about what you're saying. That's why you're on video.
That's the one thing. I'm glad you brought that up, that when I watch myself in my very self-critical mode, I will look at my face. I go, Jesus, I look severe. I'm
Yeah.
really making a point, and like I'm,
Right.
sending folks into war or something. And I'm like, but I was having so much fun. Why do I look so intense?
Yeah.
And so what I try to do, of course, then is if I'm on a show or whatever, podcast, I try to smile all the time. And then I feel like it's like plasticine smile. And I'm like, dude, that's not really you. But man, if you're not smiling, you start looking really extreme. And I'm afraid
Grim.
of scaring people off. Grim. Yeah. What do you
Right,
do
right.
about that?
That's a very common problem. Like you said, you can't go by your feelings, right? Because you felt like, yeah, I was really, excited about
I'm
this. I'm
into this.
happy.
I'm intense about it. But man, do I look mean all of a sudden.
Right, right. I've had that feedback too. And so it takes practice. And part of that, to be expressive, everybody thinks, well, that's great advice. I'll go do that. Well, it's not that easy. I mean, actors spend a lot of time warming up physically so that they have access to those expressions, because you're right, if you just you try to smile more and it's not connected to a feeling, and you're not loosened up, it feels like your face is going to crack, and it feels so phony and it looks phony. So you have to work those muscles, and especially the facial muscles, the eyes, because your face is part of your toolkit, right? And so you don't, it's like a racer. They don't come up to the race and they haven't stretched or anything. It's like, why would you expect to be good at that? And I would say you have to couple that with looking for things to smile about and to be happy about. Your performance really is a direct measure of how intensely you feel about something, right? And so your intensity may be coming out more of, I want you guys to do this because I really know it's going to work, as opposed to maybe reframing it from yourself. Like, I can say it with thinking, oh, you guys are going to be so, you guys need to do this. It is going to work, and I'm just thinking about how happy they're going to be. You have to frame it in a way that works for you so that comes out naturally as a smile. So it's sort of an internal and external job when it comes to, being expressive on camera.
Now, early in my career, I had the benefit, in hindsight, it was a huge benefit that I produced, I don't know, gosh, it seemed like thousands of corporate videos. One company in particular, Forever Living Products, I worked with them for, I don't know, well, I still work with them today coaching, but I probably produced videos for them for 14 years. And I worked with a cinematographer, camera guy, Dave Thompson, who was really great. And it was often just he and I, and we'd be out in the field and we would be shooting interviews and lots of interviews. And he showed me how to light, and also where you're using the frame where you don't have your subject right smack dab in the middle of your frame. You put them a little bit left to the right or whatever's going to give you a little bit more drama in, which is otherwise it can be a very boring corporate video, and you're trying to pull something out of someone who doesn't really want to give you anything to begin with. So when I shoot videos like the one you were critiquing, I try to use that, one third, one side or the other, versus planting myself right in the middle of it. So it's just a little bit more interesting to look at. I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on that.
Depending on what you're trying to do, I think videos that you're trying to sell a product or get people's attention is one thing. So dramatic effect can sometimes be helpful there. When I am having a conversation with somebody or speaking to a group, I want them to feel like we're sitting across from each other. And I would find it off-putting if somebody were seated off to the side. So that's my thought on that. I think it can be used for more dramatic effect, like you said, and to mix things up. And certainly if you've got something in your set, in your background that is supporting you, like if I've got a screen back there or a whiteboard, I want to share the space with that. But if I'm trying to recreate that in-person experience, I want to make it as real as possible.
Yeah, and something just occurred to me as you and I are sitting here. We have very square frames. And so if you're sitting to the side, it looks weird, and we more naturally center ourselves in a squared frame like you would with Zoom and others. But when I'm shooting in 16 by 9, so you've got a little bit more screen real estate to work with. And I get your point. If you're going to be training, then maybe you want something coming up over your shoulder, or if you're just selling, you're going to go for more of that dramatic effect.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So thinking of the purpose.
And of course, the other two major things is good lighting and great sound. Because if you're lit well and you've got a great camera but horrible sound, boy, everything goes right out the window. And same is true with dark lighting. And if anything, I think maybe my lighting on that video is probably a little darker than I would normally like. So when I reshoot it, I'm going to take your advice, and I'll probably tweak the lighting just a little bit brighter.
Yeah, it didn't jump out at me, but because you were well lit, so the background was a little darker, which I don't mind because it's a nice contrast. So yeah, it didn't jump out at me, but it maybe a tinge. Wouldn't go too much, but
maybe something. It's that good depth of field.
One of the sayings I used to hear on sets that I love is, "No amount of makeup can make up for bad lighting." It really is that you can make people look fantastic or horrible with lighting. So it is worth the investment. And, these are things that we just need to have in place now, because this is our world. And
this is what we do.
It's not that'd be nice to have. If you don't have good lighting, invest in it. It's not, there's some less expensive setups. Nobody should be using the camera in their laptop, right? They're not good cameras for the most part. Some of them are located in really awful places where you've got to do yoga to get in front of them. But the quality isn't good. And, people are going to compare you to other people that are coming across much more credibly and, confidently on camera. And so you don't want to be losing business or a deal or a relationship because you don't look credible and confident and like somebody they'd want to do business with.
Yeah. Well, like I said at the top of the show, it is live amateur TV
every day.
And if you find yourself in front of the camera a lot, then one of the first places you should go, if you haven't gone there already, is to get Julie's book, Look Me in the Eye, Using Video to Build Relationships with Customers, Partners, and Teams. So that's step number one. Can you give us 2 or 3 more pieces of advice this moment that listeners can take away so the next time they're in front of the camera, they are already coming off better?
Absolutely. Well, I would say you don't know what you're working with until you watch yourself on video. And like you were talking about earlier, and it's very hard to watch yourself. Most of us are just hypercritical, and we're critical about things that probably don't matter to our audience. Like, oh, what is going on with my hair? Or why does my eyebrow do that weird thing? Those don't matter to your audience. So, record yourself, try to view it objectively. And I actually have a blog post out on being a good director to yourself on video. And what a director does is they look for, first of all, did that work? Did that work? If I was an audience member, did that work? Or did it take me away from the message? Or did it communicate something different than was intended? It's not shaming, it's not blaming, it's just being very factual. And it's looking also for, what did you do well? So start with, what's good here? What do you have to work with? And then look for those things that take you, out of the moment, and evaluate with some kind of, checklist. In my book, you can access this 20-point self-evaluation where it says, did I make eye contact when I was speaking, when I was listening? Did I make eye contact 70% or more of the time? Were my movements within frame? Because if you don't have a good evaluation to go through and check, you're going to go off into all kinds of, petty things, or start worrying about your content. Well, I should say this better. And this is not a place to work necessarily on your content at the same time. We want to work on, our video presence and our communication. You can do another run through where you listen to yourself for the words and the language. But this is, staying focused on behavior is how you're going to get better.
So watch yourself on video. Don't get too self-critical because, again, your audience isn't going to judge you so much on that as it is content and delivery, I'm assuming. And then go through your checklist to see how much time.
Go through your checklist. And then pick one thing at a time to work on, because most people are like, oh, I'm terrible on video. And, at least when you have this checklist, you can say, no, I'm not terrible. These are the things I need to do better, right?
Yeah.
And then just pick one that's going to have the most, immediate impact and figure out what you need to do to get better at that. The book is really a how-to guide on how do you gesture? How do you be more expressive? How do you make eye contact? How do you read body language? So get the resources you need to get better and start practicing. And when you get better at that, then work your way down the list. And that's how, we do it as actors. And that's how, we should be doing it in business too, because it works.
Where can people learn more about you and your work?
You can go to my website at juliehansen.live. And like I said, there's lots of blog posts and some videos there. Then also, of course, pick up Look Me at the Eye on Amazon.
Well, thank you so much for being here and for looking me in the eye this entire presentation, this entire interview.
I better practice what I preach, right?
I really appreciate you being here. And thank you all for listening to this edition of The Business of Story. Please share Julie and her work with your team and any of your colleagues or anybody you know that's out there. Maybe they're struggling a little bit to really own that virtual presence. Share this episode with them, of course, and get her new book. It's just absolutely fabulous. It just walks you through everything you need. It's probably like the only guide you need to really start picking up your presence. And again, you don't have to be like the top professional online, with your camera and that. You don't have to be out there trying to beat someone in that respect. Just be yourself and find these ways to express yourself with that eye contact using, some hand coordination, some hand movements and whatever. And I'm going to take her advice and even slow down a little bit more in my presentations, finding other ways to get my passion across. If I can help you tell your story, come on over to The Business of Story. And if you have yet to take the ABTs of Selling and or the ABTs of Branding course, this short little messaging marvel that will completely revolutionize how you present your content in what order, please come on over to thebusinessofstory.com/ABT. You can learn more about the programs there, and you can link through and start taking your short courses today. That's businessofstory.com/ABT. And if I can be of service to you, shoot me a note over at park@businessofstory.com. And until next Monday, when we will have another amazing story artist right here for you like Julie, remember that the most potent story you'll ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks so much for listening.